created to help you walk through different things. And this will enable you to have some deliverable to take away and something to work on until we get to our next meeting. And I believe that's in November. So I will start and kick us off. All right. The agenda for what we're going to talk about today is we have our pre-formation steps, our formation filing requirements, our federal and state revenue department requirements, our post-formation requirements, and then I'll take questions from those in the room as well as anyone who wants to put something in the chat. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was your pre-formation steps. You're going to be, if you're looking at what you want to do, what you're going to bring into the marketplace, you need to choose your business structure, and we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to select a business name, and there's different requirements for selecting a business name. And I'd like you to choose a registered agent. You don't have to, but it does make it easier for you. And those people, for a fee, a certain amount once a year will take care of making sure you're registered in all the different places and in compliance with the states. Now, this next slide, it gets a little hairy, okay? So it's a lot of information on here, and we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to walk back through this. Choosing your business entity in North Carolina, there's key differences between the different entity types, and the decisions that you're going to have to try to figure out. What do I want? Liability protection. Do you need personal asset protection for what you're bringing in? The tax implications, pass-through versus double taxation can depend upon how you organize yourself. Your ownership structure. Are you going to be a single owner versus multiple owners or maybe even investors? Professional services. For instance, if you're a licensed professional that's a lawyer or a doctor, you would need to set up a PLLC, and there's different requirements for that. Also, if you have any kind of growth plans, right? Future investment, going public, anything like that, if you're a startup, knowing you're going to want to go down the road and get investors and do different things like that, all of those different, things come in between. And then you have your compliance burden, right? How much paperwork can you handle? How much do you want to handle? And a lot of that depends on what type of structure you form. So I would, like I said, your professional, your PLLC, which is on the far right here, that's your lawyer, your doctor. If you're a single owner and you're a simple business owner, I recommend you file with, I highlighted it there because that's usually the most protection for you. It's an LLC, that's your limited liability corp, okay? And that is going to be pass-through taxation, right? So you don't have to worry about filing separate for your business all the time. You can file either as an S corp or through your own individual information. You also have, if you want multiple owners, if you're a regular, you can also do a PLLC. And then if you want to minimize any self-employment tax in an LLC, you'd go through an S corporation. Then a plan to raise investment capital, that's really where you're going to start to see a C corporation. So this chart, to me, helps kind of work through for you what you're going to want out of different things. And like I said, most small businesses end up at an LLC because it's the most protection for the business. They can do pass-through taxes and file like an S corporation, and it allows the best amount of protection for the person. Now, if you're a sole proprietor, you don't get those same levels of protection. If something goes wrong with the business, someone can come after your personal assets, right? If you form an LLC and you're a sole LLC member, someone can come forward and not go after your personal assets if there's an issue with the business. An S corporation is another level of protection, and we'll talk about all the specific requirements for the different types of formations. But the C Corp would be your most highest level, and that would be if you were looking to then take on investors and go public and all those types of things. So let's kind of dive into them. North Carolina makes it pretty affordable. Some in more states than others. But what it does is it allows you to come to the table and they give you some pre-forms and they do some other things that'll allow you to have more success. So let's talk about what we're going to do next. So after you've figured out which kind of business entity you want to have, and I will say, as you're trying to figure that out, talking to a lawyer, just a quick couple minutes. We do all these 4 all calls. You've got your small business centers. You've got folks that'll help you make some of those decisions, can really set you up for the future in a better way than we're going to go forward. I'm just going to grab this because when I touch things, I've got to be able to see it from here. So when you're going to select your business name, okay, the first thing you can do is say, okay, what kind of business am I going to set up? And like I said, there will be specific requirements for what type of formation you have to have. So if you're an LLC, you have to either have limited in your name, you have to have limited liability, you have to have an LLC. If you're a PLLC, it needs to say Professional Limited Liability Corporation or PLLC. That has to be in your name. Once you figure out what the fundamental part of your name is, you can go to the North Carolina Secretary of State website, and I've given the link not only in this presentation notes, but also in the checklist that you'll get at the end. And what it's going to allow is for you to be able to search to see if another entity in North Carolina already has your name, right? And then how you could change it to be fundamentally different. I would say when you're coming up with names, there can be a whole host of interesting ways and things, and everybody's got their little nomenclatures. The marketing department of any company or, marketing folks always want you to come up with something super, interesting and different and, whatever. But sometimes it's just as easy to say your name, services, and then LLC or whatever, and put some information after it. Once you've ensured that you've got the compliance with the naming conventions, you also want to maybe start to think about a trademark search. You can put that off, but you also want to make sure that down the road, you're not going to, come into any liability with a company that might already have a trademark on that name. Okay, so you can do a simple trademark search. You can also hire an attorney to do a simple trademark search. Usually that's a flat fee, but you can also go to the USPTO website. You can search for your name. You can see if it's a word mark or a design mark, and you can kind of get an idea for what is out there in your space and then decide if you want to go forward. But truly just the name of the company can't always, isn't always going to be a trademark. The next thing you're going to want to talk and think about is your registered agent. How much paperwork do you want to do, right? So your registered agent in North Carolina, there's a various, multiple ones that can do one state, multiple states. It's usually about $65 a year, roughly. And they will make sure that you don't forget to do your annual filings. And we'll talk about that as things go up with compliance. Because one thing you don't want to do is do all this work to set your business up only to have you not meet your annual compliance requirements by filing filing fees every year and updating your annual requirements. So those are the two things I'd kind of like you to think about when you're figuring out if you want to be your own registered agent. And I can tell you many companies don't want to mess with the hassle. Many internal legal teams don't want to mess with the hassle of having to handle that compliance for whatever multiple entities. And so they outsource that to ensure that they don't miss any kind of timelines or deadlines. Now, let's talk about the formation filing requirements. I'm going to talk about the 3 most common. Like I said, if you're a sole proprietor and you go back to that sheet, there's not a formation requirement, right? You don't have to do much. It just kind of, you register your name and you go forward. If you form an LLC, you're going to have to file articles of organization. It's $125 the last time I checked the Secretary of State's website on North Carolina, but it can all be done online. All of these in North Carolina can be done online. You can do it by paper, but online's the fastest, and you can get a turnaround depending on how much you want to spend in either a couple weeks to 24 to 48 hours, okay? Depends what you want to do, how fast you want to move. The other thing is the name requirements. Like I said, it has to say LLC or some variation, and you're going to need when you file, you're going to need your LLC name, you're going to need your registered agent, you're going to need a principal address, and your, purpose, like what are we doing this for? What am I doing? I want to provide legal services, or I want to provide marketing services. And you're going to need to get the organizer's signature, whoever's actually filing that document, right? And they're going to have to file and upload it to the Secretary of State's website. Corporations are different. You're going to have an articles of incorporation. So think about it. If you have an LLC or a PLLC, you're going to have articles of organization because you have members. And I don't want to get into the weeds, but you'll have members. Whereas with a corporation, you're going to find articles of incorporation. And you're going to have to, again, have your corporate name, your registered agent, and you're going to have to have authorized shares, right? You're going to have to talk about how many shares you want to authorize. They can be a par value, nominal, 0.1 of a, percentage of a cent. So all these different kinds of things go into which type of corporation you want to provide. On the PLLC, it's going to mirror the LLC, and it is basically going to be the same kind of costing fees, and you're going to require, also a certificate from your licensing board. So if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, if you're an architect, right, an engineering firm, you can all do PLLCs, but you'll have to take an extra step where you go to your certifying board, get approval that you're in good standing, and then approval, and then that's sent over to the state of North Carolina. It takes a little bit longer, but it's also an extra level of protection and lets people know that you're well regarded in your space. All right, I'm going to flip to the next slide. There we go, if it will let me. Sorry guys, we're having a issue. On the federal and state revenue department requirements, okay, these are going to be your employment identification number, which everyone knows they have an SSN, right, a social security number. But for your business needs the equivalent of a social security number for the federal government so they can tax you. So you get an EIN, right? And that is going to be your federal tax ID. That's what you'll use to file your taxes and do those types of things. On the North Carolina Department of Revenue, you're also going to need to file for your tax ID there, right? And they're going to need that information. When you're going forward and you're getting this, I'm going to back up and talk about the EIN, okay? You apply online at irs.gov. It's absolutely free, and it's required for multi-member LLCs and corporations, and it takes literally 5 minutes. Now, the only thing I would say is that the IRS, after you fill out all their forms and their information and you send it, I have found lately when I've been doing this for clients that what happens is they do not do it after 10 o'clock anymore. So there used to be 24/7 and it was auto-generated, but they have downtimes now in their system. And so you cannot do it like after 10 o'clock at night. I have not tested how early. I just haven't. And it turns back on. But you need to kind of stick to that during normal business hours. Same thing goes for North Carolina Department of Revenue. For your tax ID, apply online again. And I have the links for you in not just this checklist you'll get at the end of this, but also embedded into the notes for this presentation. And they'll, basically it's required for all North Carolina entities, and it takes about 10 minutes, a little longer than the federal, but you get that, right? There will be additional steps down the road that I'll talk about if you're going to have employees, where you're going to need to file for employee withholding tax and unemployment tax, okay? So, but these are just what you need to start your business to set yourself up. All right, so that's getting us through these initial requirements. So now you're like, all right, I figured everything out in the upfront. I figured out my business name. I know what I need to do. I've got all these numbers, and you're like, all right, Beth, what do I do now? Okay, I've got a business, but what do I do with it other than try to sell my services or help people or whatever that's going to be? You're going to need to start getting together your organizational documents. You're going to have to think about your ongoing compliance. You need to think about banking and financial folks, business accounts, professional services, and operational setup, okay? So next up, I'm going to talk about each one of these in turn. And at any time, if someone has a question, you want to raise your hand, whether it's in the room, whether it's on the webinar, just let me know and I'll stop. I know it's a lot of information and I'm coming at you fast and furious. First thing, we've already talked about your organizational documents that you need to get started, that you'll need to file and set up your entity. What you need to do almost immediately thereafter, and there are templates for this, just like there are online for the North Carolina Secretary of State. You can find templates, but what I would say is when you're setting up your business, it is advisable to make sure you're doing it in the way that's going to protect you the most, especially if you have multiple members in an LLC or you're setting up a board with a corporation, okay? So you've got your operating agreement, which is going to be required, right? If you have a corporation, you're going to also need bylaws, okay? That's different than the articles of incorporation. The bylaws govern what officers you're going to have. You're required to have a president, secretary, no matter what, right? Because those are the folks that are going to have to sign off on board minutes and do things like that in the state of North Carolina to complete governance practices. So you need to think about what the stocks would be, how that would work out, how you would sell stocks. It's a little more of a complicated structure on a corporation. And with a PLLC, and just like the LLC, you're going to need the operating agreements. You can also have membership agreements. So you have the operating agreement that kind of controls how the business runs, and then you can have membership agreements between the different members that say, you know what, you're not allowed to sell, you know, your interest in this business to anyone. You have to give me the option to buy it out first, or you have to do something like that. It basically protects your rights as a member within that organization. Now, if you're the sole member, you don't need one. You don't need an agreement with yourself. And the way you run your business is basically organized off of your operating agreement. All right. So that's the organizational documents that you would want to take care of and set up. Those do not go outside of the company. Okay. Those are not anything you have to turn into anyone other than maybe, and we'll talk about this, a bank or financial institution or insurance company that you're trying to get an account with. The next thing I want to talk to you guys is about your ongoing compliance, okay? Every year in North Carolina, they are due on April 15th. You must file an annual report. You must pay the amount of due that year for your annual report. And you're basically saying, okay, state of North Carolina, here is my registered agent. Here is my business address. Here are my officers. And here are my directors, right? And that way that maintains that so people can look you up and the North Carolina records are, you know, up to date. If you don't do that, and they will give you a grace period, you have to pay a late filing fee. But if you fail to do that, they will basically take your business off. They'll strike it. And then your business will not be able to do anything unless it's reinstated. Okay. So that's really where we're, you know, want to make sure that you have that. Also, why I kind of emphasize getting a registered agent to make sure that someone's pinging you to do that, because the state does not ask you. It doesn't remind you. You just have to remember that it's due just about the same time as your taxes. Then you have your federal compliance, right? You need to file your taxes. And if you have any kind of business that requires any kind of EPA requirements, any of those things you need to certify annually, you're going to need to move forward and make sure you've done that. And then you have your business specific requirements. You might have local permitting laws. You might need to take care of the local health, health board. They might need to come in. If you own a hair salon, you might need to make sure that your hair, your license is up to date. Same thing goes with any other licensing that's required. You would need to make sure that you're maintaining those licenses so that you can maintain your business. All right, next one up, banking and financial, right? So bank accounts and business insurance. So when I'm dealing with these, I want you to think about your bank accounts, and I have these in the notes. For whatever reason, they didn't get linked over to my slide. But what I would tell you is you're going to need to walk in and have your articles of incorporation. You're going to need to show that they were filed with the Secretary of State. You're going to need to show that you are in good standing. You can order that certificate from the Secretary of State, and it'll be delivered to you online almost automatically. And then you're going to need to be able to give them your federal tax ID number, your North Carolina state ID number, and any tax withholding numbers that you need if you have employees. This is what you will need to set up a bank account in your business's name. Also, if you're going to get credit card or credit account or credit facility, say you want to take out a loan for your business to start it up, you will need that same information for your bank accounts. Then on the flip side, you have is business insurance, okay? You have everything from property insurance, if you have a physical location, to, business interruption insurance. For instance, in this part of the state last year suffered massive, massive catastrophic flooding with Hurricane Helene. Many businesses were underinsured for where they were, right? So they didn't have flood insurance because they weren't in a floodplain, and they didn't have business interruption insurance that would have protected and say given them insurance to cover up to 12 months of their payroll, rebuilding, all of those things. So there's all different kinds of insurance that you need to be looking at to make sure if you're in a professional capacity, you're going to want malpractice insurance. If you're doing things that involve folks' homes, taking down trees, being on other people's property, general liability. What if you, let their dog out and, something happens, or you step on a rake and one of your employees gets bit by a dog on a local property? You need insurance to cover yourself and your business. Right. The next thing I would say is that you need to think about your professional services. We all think that we can handle a small business, right? It's just me. I can handle it. It's no problem. Until you have to be the one to handle all the paperwork, right? You need to look at whether or not you can do that and manage that while trying to grow your business. Accountants and CPAs, just getting an advice. Are you someone that needs to, if you're owning a salon, for instance, or, something that interfaces with the public and you're taking in money? Do you need a square payroll system? Do you need to be able to collect and charge tax and sales tax? Accountants and CPAs, locally within the community. I'm not talking your, super big four auditing firms or anything like that. I'm talking local CPAs and accountants that can help you say, here's a template for your books. Here's how to keep track of your receipts. Here's how to do all these different things. And also, that's another important reason you get your own banking and financial business accounts so that you can keep that money separate from your personal business, so your personal lives, so that you don't have any bleed through between your personal money and your business's money. You should always be paying yourself from your business. So your business takes the money in, your business takes whatever taxes, your business pays you. Or your business at the end of the year can give you a dividend, depending on how your tax formation is. You also should look at whether or not you need an attorney. There's a whole nother series we did 2 years ago, roughly, on what you need to know as a small business owner and entrepreneur about contracts. I'm happy to share that presentation with you all too. I did it 2 years ago with Bianca, and we, have a presentation with all the notes and everything that we can also provide. And we'll probably do it again as part of this series so that people can ask questions. We'll refresh it and do whatever we need to do. But contracts come in every shape and form, whether you're signing one for a registered agent to whether you are signing up to engage an attorney. If you're looking at someone's terms and conditions for a payroll provider or for the bank, making sure that you're protected. And when you're buying services, you're getting a, purchase order or an invoice and you're selling services, those all have terms and conditions. Setting it up so that you have everything that's done that you need. And especially if you have employees, you want to make sure that you have employment agreements with those employees, even if it's just bare bones, to protect your business's interests. Okay. The last thing I would talk about on the professional services at this time would be your insurance agent or broker. Okay. They're going to be able to tell you what you need, what kind of insurance you need for your business. You don't need to be overinsured, but you don't want to be underinsured. You want to be able to get that mix just right so that you have the right amount of insurance to protect your business. The next thing I wanted to talk about with you is the operational setup, right? People don't always think about all the business licenses and permits that they're going to need, right? City, county, and other state regulations all might apply to your business, right? You might need to get a local permit to have a brewery in a certain area of the county, or to be able to do certain types of, distilling or food processing. I've seen a lot of this recently in the food industry when you're seeing like hemp infused beverages and different things like that. And it brings it to a whole nother level of the federal requirements that states and federal sometimes differ that you have to be able and be aware of. So you need to understand what the license scope is in your area, and then your business location, right? If you're going to have a commercial area, if you're going to have an actual presence, a storefront, if you're just going to be working from home, what does that look like? What kind of insurance do you need to do that? Any zoning ordinances, right? Anything like that that you need to worry about. And obviously, again, business licensure for your location, right? So you might have a local tax on businesses in a certain county that you don't have in another county. So you need to make sure that you are abiding by all of those. And those are obviously things that we need to help you with and move through. So we've worked through pre-formation. We've worked through what you need to do to form the company. And we worked through post-formation. We've worked through your financials. But the thing I really want to find out is, what do you need and what do you think about when you're going through all of this? Because it can be overwhelming and cumbersome. And if you start at the beginning and you set just a simple formation, it will save you so much time and money down the road trying to fix it after something has gone sideways. So I always try to say, with lawyers, I like to be the cleanup crew, but I'd rather clean before the company comes instead of having to clean up afterwards and have to deal with a whole bunch of mess. And just a little bit of startup and a little bit of thinking and coming with these checklists when you want to talk to somebody, we're willing to help you get started and we're willing to help you get set up. So I know that I'd committed to Bianca that if, anyone who registered for this class, right, we will provide you these materials and we will help you step through the next steps. So the next item that we're going to do is, if people have this information and they want to come and sit with an attorney, we will literally sit there and help you do your formation. Okay. So the North Carolina Bar Foundation Entrepreneurs Assistance Program is willing to take anyone who's registered for this class and help walk them through getting their business set up and started. And that's a commitment that we're making to this group. So please take us up on it. We have a whole host of attorneys who have a wealth of knowledge and they want to help people. And I'm happy to do whatever I can. So on that note, I'll turn it over for questions and we'll go from there. Any question yet? Go ahead.
Several questions. First of all, because I did not be able to get registered for the class online, I couldn't figure out how to get it to go through.
No worries.
Can I officially be registered?
You're here. Yeah, absolutely. You're in.
Okay, great. Thank you. When you said tax treatment, pass through, I missed, what does pass through mean?
So there's two different ways when you have a sole proprietorship or an LLC. Okay, you can either have it pass through and basically it goes into your personal taxes, right? Whether you have a sole member or multiple members, and it's just done, you just are committed an LLC and you're going to be taxed as an individual, right? On whatever the earnings are and whatever your membership agreement says. So if it's you as a single person, then it would tax through onto your personal taxes, what your revenue is. If you create an S corporation with an LLC, hear me out, you don't have to actually create the S corp. You have an option with an LLC to be treated as an S corp for tax purposes, which allows you to pass through and do dividends at the end of the year. It's much more, a lot of people, you need to get an accountant involved, but what I can say is it is usually more beneficial because then you can do write-offs. For instance, if I'm coming down here for a business meeting, right? And I have I'm my sole proprietor and I come down here for a business meeting, the gas in my car, the dinner I take the client out to, all of those things I can then charge to the corporation at the end of that month. And then I can basically be reimbursed from the corporation. If you're doing it and it's not an S corp, my understanding from the accountants is that is not how that works. You can't then go write it off. It's much more, it's a lot, there adds an extra layer also of protection when you're dealing with keeping the funds from the company separate from your funds. Okay, so, and then say down the road, client you had lunch with down here gets upset with you and, has a dispute, right? If you are in an LLC, then that dispute, and especially if you're keeping the funds separate and you're paying yourself from the LLC, like a monthly salary, you would then be able, that client would only be able to go after the funds of the LLC instead of your personal funds. So if you do a sole proprietorship, they're open, your whole world is open to being gone after. If you are, I've seen things where someone was doing tree work, right? The tree fell on someone's house instead of the opposite direction. Well, the homeowner and its insurance company came after the owner, that sole proprietor, for all the damage to the house because they didn't have the right insurance and they hadn't protected themselves by having an LLC instead of a sole proprietorship. The tax part, I am no tax accountant. Lawyers, I always say I went to law school, so I didn't have to do numbers. So I basically will tell you to go talk to the tax accountant, but I can say for myself, I always set up an LLC and then I have it treated as just one extra form and you're treated as an S corp. And then you have the business have its own separate thing. You get paid, your business pays you. Someone pays the business clears the money, the business pays you as an employee. And then at the end of the year, if there's money left in this account, like extra revenue or whatever, my understanding is you can take a sweep through dividend and it doesn't have any extra tax complicated. But you have to talk to a tax accountant about that. So I understand that there are tax benefits with treating yourself with an LLC as an S corp. And I would be happy. I have just talked to a tax accountant last week, had dinner with her, and kind of trying to see if I can get other people in this space to maybe come and do things where they can talk to you guys about this stuff as well. At a high level without doing all that, the down in the weeds stuff that, has to go on for bigger corporations. I won't throw her name out there until she says yes.
Next question. So, well, back to what you're talking about now.
Mhm.
If I'm just gonna be a one-person deal,
Mhm.
but I want to set it up as a LLC, you would still recommend also setting up the S corp?
I would. So it's an LLC, not a separate S corp. Okay. So when you think of an S corp, I want you to think of not you're setting up an S corporation. There's a special, and I didn't put that on the slide, for that purpose. Let me go back to that slide if I can. How do I go backwards? 1 second, guys. I'm going to go back. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, you're getting up close and personal, but I am not the most tax. Okay, so when you see that S corporation, okay, I didn't talk a whole lot about it. It's not always done a lot. That's not very, my English on that one wasn't great. An S corporation is like a closely held business. That's going to be a family-owned business in many cases. But when I'm talking about an LLC, you're opting to be treated like an S corp for tax purposes. You don't have to do all the S corp requirements for formation and filing and all that. You create yourself as an LLC. And then when you go to register to how you want to be treated and taxed, you would choose to be treated like an S corp. And there's a special tax form with the IRS that you have to fill out and send in. And then you get that notification that says, yes, we have approved that you can be treated for tax purposes like an S corp. which is treated like a closely held family corporation. And we can always get into it. If people have questions on S corps, I can give more information about them. They're just not as common as they used to be because they require a lot of the same more cumbersome setup that you see in a C corp. But you know, they have all these special provisions and they have to be closely related and different entities. So a lot of people find more protection and they have less cumbersome work with an LLC.
So if I'm a single person LLC,
Sole member.
so, okay. Do I need a tax ID number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. You're going to need one for, you want to get one with EIN for your federal, and you're going to need one from North Carolina. And if you're going to pay yourself through the LLC as a payment, you'll need to get also a withholding number for, you know, to make sure you can have all your taxes taken out when you pay yourself. So there's all different kinds of platforms now that make it very easy. And I've talked to multiple accountants and CPAs who say, you know, for $29 a month, right, you can set yourself up. And I've seen Square's one. I mean, I think we all see it. You know, you go check out somewhere and they have this Square thing. I know there's other ones, but they'll put in your, you know, payroll. You put in all your information about your company into there, right? You register your company with it, your banking account information, and then you would list yourself as an employee. And then you would run your, you know, put in all your bank account information and do all those things. And eventually, if you have another employee or whatever, but if you don't, that's fine. And then you would pay yourself, you know, however your frequency is. And then they'll make sure that the state gets all those taxes taken out and all that stuff on the upfront. So you're not sitting there worrying about that all the way at the end of the year. Like, how much am I going to owe in taxes? How much is this costing? Because you have the employer tax and then you have the employee tax, right? So you're going to have to get taxed on both sides. So you're going to have to make sure that all that's done appropriately. And services like that for like very low rates will just go ahead and send it on. You don't need something massive like a Paychex or a Paycor or an EDP for you, right? And that can be, it's super simple.
And what is that called?
I've seen it as low as $29 a month.
I mean, this service that you're talking about, what is it called?
Oh, sorry, it was Square. It's just the one that I've seen the most frequently with small businesses.
Square?
Mm-hmm. So you know how you go to tap on something, they say tap to pay, and they'll have those little kiosks, and you can, you know, do all these different things, like those little white kiosk things that people see. That they got started, they used to have the reason they're called squares, they used to have a little like white square that they plugged into a computer or phone, and you would run your little credit card through that when you're checking out. Now they've just gone to the tap to pay, but it's a service. I can give anyone who wants it. And I'm not recommending any service. I'm not saying anything like that. I've just seen it the most often lately. And I know that there's other ones out there.
In addition to the Small Business Center Network's partnership with the Bar Foundation, we also partner with the North Carolina Department of Revenue. And so every month there are 7 or 8 free seminars, webinars that one can go to. And if you go to our website, just avtech.edu/SBC and select seminars and state programs, we have that. So yesterday was a sales and use tax workshop.
Yep.
These are generally an hour and a half or so, but I recommend that folks get into that webinar early so that they can ask questions to the instructor, and you're getting a real live person, you know, that, hey, let me get your name. Can I chat with you later? So that's another resource to help.
And if you shoot me that link and that information, I'll just add it to the formation checklist so that people can I can put it in their sales tax. Because if you're selling goods, if you're providing a service, you're going to have to, you know, you're going to have to get sales and use tax if you're selling something in certain cases, unless it's business to business. So that's a whole nother level, but normally in this space, we're doing a smaller subset.
And Beth, we actually have a lot of questions.
Okay, all right, so let me know. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm getting used to my bifocals and I was struggling to read the screen and this. So turn to this.
All right, so
Okay.
Mary, that's our first one that came
All
up.
right, is it necessary to file an EIN NCID even if you're starting as a sole proprietorship, especially if the business is not yet been proven, AKA just starting, not profitable? No, you do not need to do that for a sole proprietorship. I'm gonna make sure you're basically going to have to pay almost nothing. It's the pass-through treatment. So you're basically being taxed in your sole capacity, but you're gonna have to make sure you keep those records. So basically it'd be like, hey, Bianca and I decide that she's gonna go out and rake everybody's leaves because they're all falling, right? She doesn't need to go do that, but she still would need to report that income that she makes on that. Now, if your business gets up and thriving, I would definitely take the next step and create an LLC. But I would say it doesn't hurt to create an EIN or file because it costs very little money and it protects your name and it protects any of those interests that you have going forward. So if your business does take off, you have that ability and you don't have to go backwards and then start switching around. It's also less complicated on a tax perspective because it's easier to keep your records separate and it keeps you from a liability standpoint in a safer position. But I do understand the sole proprietorship and kind of wanting to see where things go. And I think that's how a lot of things start. A couple months is I'm just going to see how this shakes out. I totally get that, Mary. All right, Ashley, can you talk about the newest assets proclamation thing that came out last year? It's a brand new. Threatened fees if not completed. I had an LLC that opened as a virtual biz. I lost my home. Oh, sorry to hear that. Losing to a landslide. I want to understand as I consider moving forward with another small coaching and consulting company or choose to do solopreneur work going forward. What is an S Corp? I thought it was an individual. It keeps being mentioned. I don't know if I understand it. All right. So actually, I'm going to take two separate things. The new assets proclamation thing. I'm not sure what the brand new North Carolina requirement is that you're talking about, but I will give you my email. And if you shoot me at the end of this, I'll give you guys my email. You could shoot it in there. Just use my hold on one. The McKee at holdonlaw.com. What I would say is, what is an S Corp? So I'm going to start there. You lost your home and office space. I'm not sure the new requirement, so maybe we can have a quick chat and we can talk about that. But it is an S Corp. It's mostly like we're talking about it in two ways. An S Corp is going to be a more closely held corporation. There's certain requirements. I can add them to this for you guys, but think of that as like a family-owned business where everybody is closely related. Okay. So for instance, I worked for a company a while, years and years ago, and they were an S Corp. Okay, because everybody who owned shares in that business was related by family in some way or was closely related to the family and had to meet all these qualifications. When that company went to go, not IPO, but look to be acquired by a non-closely held, non-family member, what we did is we made that S Corp, we had to file and make it into a C Corp so that it then could be more easily acquired. So that's when you're talking about just the formation, how the business is. What we've been talking about is when you have an LLC that for tax purposes is being treated like an S Corp. So you have a special tax where you can then write off different things within your LLC. So that if you go to have a client consulting meeting, for instance, then you would be able to write that amount off to your business, or if you take it as an employee, you'd be able to get reimbursed. Okay, so those are kind of how those two things differ. But I'm not sure what you mean by the assets. So Bianca's just put my email in the chat, and we can talk after this sometime in the next week or two. So I want to understand. All right, Holly, have you ever used private bank accounts, credit cards for your LLC? Can someone still ultimately sue you for private assets? How important is it to make sure you keep all personal accounts separate? I keep everything separate. And you do that to protect yourself, okay? So I have seen in an LLC, I will say this, I have seen in LLCs where some accountants will say, go get an American Express card in your name, right? But do it as an employee that's then asking only for reimbursement from the business. If the business is buying something, right, the business should have its own credit card and its own bank accounts. What they call it is if you commingle funds, and there's a very legal term that sounds really cool, but it's really complicated. It's called piercing the corporate veil. So if you are an LLC, right, and you are treating that LLC as your own personal bank account, you're commingling the funds of the company, you're just paying yourself over here, using the company to pay for your kids' school lunches or something like that, then what can happen is if that client that you dropped the tree on their house comes after you, they can pierce that corporate veil and say you weren't treating it as two separate entities. You were treating it as your own bank account. So that is why, from a legal liability standpoint, I want you guys to keep things as separate as possible. And if you are going to use a private card for your LLC and not get one for your business, then treat it only in the effect of you are using that card as an employee of that LLC, okay? And you are using that to then seek reimbursement from your LLC for expenses you've made in doing the work of the business, no different than you would if you were working for a corporation and you didn't have a corporate credit card and you had to go to some conference and the corporation said, you go, just expense it back later. And you then go back and you file out a requisition, expense reimbursement form. That's how those go. So I hope that answers your question. So let me know if it doesn't. Anything else?
Got a few things in the chat.
All right.
Erica, she mentioned maybe talking about tax treatment.
Okay. So Erica, with the tax treatment, I'm going to add one thing and the tax. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it's kind of like I was saying, we need to talk about the formations on their own and then the tax treatment with the LLC as separate from how it's treated. I get that.
And then Jonathan, question.
Okay, after organization LLC, we expect to file for design patent to cover our major aspects of our product design. Oh, yes. All right. When you're dealing with IP, that is a whole nother realm of wax. So, so what I would say, and I've dealt with this a lot, if the employees or the members of the LLC have developed this IP prior to the formation of the LLC, you have two options. You have the option of those members continuing to have that proprietary right, that patent on their own. You're going to still, on a patent, you're going to have to list the inventors, right? You're going to have to go through all those filings. But the ownership of that IP, if you work for a big corporation, most of them you'll be listed as an inventor, but you have to assign your rights to that patent to the corporation as part of your agreement. If you are creating something now and you want to be paid or compensated for that, you and whoever else separately in the event you then sell that LLC, right? You have to treat that separately and you would need to have an agreement that talks about that. So if you guys all agree that and that could even be how you develop who owns what percentage of the membership, right? So you can have an LLC where it's equal distribution among members, or you can have an LLC that it's like, wait, I created this IP, so I'm going to actually have 2/3 of the rights to this LLC. And you were great in helping me form it, but you're only getting 1/3 if we ever sell this entity. So it's very, very fact specific. And those are things that you really need to work through with an IP attorney if you are going to file a design patent or utility patent before you do it. And you're going to want to make them understand that you're looking to form the business, and the inventors need to decide if the business is going to own that because it would make the business more valuable, or if the individual members own different parts of that IP. No matter what, the inventors will be listed, but that doesn't mean they own the rights to the IP. You always have to be careful with that. There's many companies, you look at every major car company, printer company, whatever, the company owns that IP. The inventors are listed. That's usually how that goes. If you want it some other way and you're doing it beforehand, I have seen and have done deals where with small business owners where they've remained those rights to the IP, so they get treated separately and paid separately in the event of an acquisition of the business. And they can take that IP to another business unless they have an agreement to the contrary. So you need to make sure if that IP is the crux of your business, that it is either owned by the business or there's some kind of agreement between the inventor and the owner and the business that they assign a right to use it or they give them a license. All right. Yes, there are quarterly reporting requirements for LLCs. It depends on how much you think you're going to be making, but at a minimum, it's quarterly for North Carolina and for the federal government for any of these entities, unless you're a sole proprietor.
And I think Mary had a question in there twice.
Okay.
We would be answer that, and that's the latest one.
All right, guys. So like I said, I'm happy to help. And even if I don't have the direct answer, I've got someone who does.
I'm sorry, Beth, we did.
Oh, what's on your?
Do you have to use your name as your business if you decide to start the sole corporation?
Do you have to use your name? It will come through. No, you don't. You don't have to use your name, but it will be, you need to tell your accountant and you need to make sure that anything that comes through, where you're going to run into problems is if you're trying to cash a check that someone writes to, if you say your name is Beth McKee and I decide to start up Leaves Leaves is my business because I can't say I'm incorporated. And someone wants to write a check to pay me, they can't write it to Leaves, right? You got to write it to me if I'm a sole proprietor. So I would be very careful in how you do that. And that's kind of why I would, those are, I would say, more for the one-off consultant jobs where you're getting into like an independent contractor type of agreement and you're being paid directly as yourself for whatever service you're providing.
I'll say one thing here. We're actually in Asheville here, and we always recommend that the client go to the Register of Deeds office and do a DBA.
Yes.
Doing business as form.
Yeah.
So that just to let folks know that you are so and so doing business as.
Yeah.
Your business. So.
That's a good point. And I think it costs like $10.
It's like $20.
Yeah. Prices. Yeah. But that's a good point. If you're going to do business as, and I will tell you this is another caveat. Say you form an LLC and you're like, I don't like this name anymore. You can go down to the Register of Deeds in the county in which your business resides, right? And file a DBA form. You can do it as an individual and then say, I am, Beth McKee Services doing business as Fabulous Attorneys Top Dog, right? And then that's what you would then have to file with the bank. The bank would have to be able to see that so that those things could go with you if they wanted to write Fabulous Top Dog, right, on the thing. Otherwise, they will need to make the checks out to you. But that's a really good point. Unfortunately, you can only do those in person at the Register of Deeds in the county in which you are operating your main business. So just be aware of that. But I've seen that where LLCs have basically not liked their first name and it maybe has nothing to do anymore with what their first thing was, but now they don't want to have to go through setting up new accounts and getting new things. So they just basically go get a DBA and then they file that with the bank, with the insurance, with everybody else. So that's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that kind of answered Erica's question. She said, can you do a DBA
Yep.
in that circumstance?
Perfect, Erica. You got
And
it.
then also, can you have more than one DBA?
You can. I don't know if I recommend it because it just makes things more complicated. But I would say if you're going to have multiple DBAs, I would be very careful that they're different services and different types of things. Ultimately, to protect yourself, I understand heading out the door as a sole proprietor, but ultimately, if you take an extra couple days to a week and you set up an LLC, or you just have a few meetings with some of these local small business groups, there are people that are willing to help you, and it will protect you in the long run from a lot of liability and damage and hurt. And that's where I see a lot of people mess up in the very beginning because it can cause a lot of problems. And ultimately $125 to, whatever a year to 200 if you have the registered agent can protect you so much on the back end, and keep you and your family safe from people who just are, a little sue happy. Because that's how I've seen it go down. All right. Oh, will you be sending invite for Denise to
Yes.
pursue? Yes. So I have, I'm here in the mountain just, yes. So you'll get, because you've registered for this, you'll get my slideshow from today with its notes, my checklist from today, but I'm going to get the information from Jill to add to that from this Small Business Center. Also, I get Bianca to send you guys my contracts presentation, but we're going to update that and we'll do it at another time because that one's chock full of information.
Yes.
And we learned the first time it really takes like an hour before you ask any questions. And then the other thing I'll commit to you is that at one of our next sessions, I don't know if it's November.
It's gonna actually be December 3rd. We'll be having our business formation session. And that's whenever you'll be able to meet with an attorney. We call that our brief advice and counsel session. You will have 45 minutes to meet with an attorney one-on-one to be able to ask questions about business formation and assist you with setting that up.
And I just want to say thank you. You guys have my email. Just, understand that I try to get to things within 24 to 48 hours, but I do my best. So working mom of lots of kids.
Yes, and again, thank you for everyone who participated and showed up today. Beth, we cannot thank you
No,
enough.
thanks,
This was so
Bianca.
thorough, great information. This will be available on the North Carolina Bar Foundation website within a week. You can find that at ncbarfoundation.org. Also, I would love to thank our partners who made this possible, the AB Tech building here. Thank you, Jill. And also Adam for setting everything up today. We would also like to thank Mount BizWorks, also the Small Business Technology Development Center of Western Carolina University, and also University of Asheville. And again, this information will be available on our website within a week, and all participants who participated today, as Beth mentioned, will be able to receive this slideshow, including the business formation checklist and next steps for you to be able to speak with an attorney volunteer.
Awesome. All right,
All
guys.
right, thank you.
Happy weekend.
I'm sorry, I didn't get
Oh, yes.
your email.
Oh, it'll be McKee. So
I'll send the link too.
It's
And I'll send that link for GOR to you too.
hold on, HO.